Jordan Peterson just recently did an interview with Dallas Jenkins. Now, this is a pretty interesting collab. Jordan Peterson is definitely a conservative commentator, and while we know that Dallas generally has very conservative views, it's interesting that he would do an interview with someone like this, who's not kind of a normal news reporter or someone who's in the mainstream media, but someone who has definitely chosen a side, so to speak, right? I don't think there was too much conversation in this interview about how right-wing they are or anything else like that. I don't think it was a big priority, which is totally fine, but there are some really interesting moments within this interview. I definitely encourage you to go check out the full thing if you want to do that. This week, we're going to be checking out a couple of different clips from this interview. We're going to start out with this one first, which talks about The Chosen's decline. And if The Chosen will decline in seasons 5, 6, and 7, will there be a drop-off like there is for most series like this? And if not, why not? So let's jump into this and watch Jordan Peterson and Dallas Jenkins. Here we go.
Curious, it's not atypical for a series to wane as it progresses. Not always, but that can happen. I mean, it exhausts itself, or people get tempted by the success of the series to warp it in one,
Or even the similarity of the previous 3 seasons. As an artist, we have to break out. We have to do something different.
Yeah.
We have to go left now instead of right.
Or you can get stuck repeating what you already did. So how are you feeling about the new season that's forthcoming?
Well, everyone who's seen it so far, this is season 5, we're currently finishing it, and those who've seen it and read the scripts and the actors who, while we were filming it, were all saying, "Oh, this is our best season yet."
That's good.
And
this is an interesting take, right, from Jordan. I think it's a very interesting thing for him to ask, coming from an outside source who's not in the chosen world, so to speak, right? He has so many other things that he's focused on in life. But for him to ask this question of Dallas is quite interesting, of thinking of the decline of the chosen and where it could come from, right? There's a couple of different options that they kind of break into here. One is the decline that Dallas kind of gets complacent in how he's writing and how he's doing the show. So he begins to do either the same thing over and over again, or he tries to do something that is totally new and totally ruins the format of the show overall. Right? These are two kind of ways that we see shows often get destroyed. There's propaganda that is added into a show later on in the series that they want to make this statement. They have to say this message, right? And they don't want to let these things go. Or they try to do the same thing over and over again. For example, like Star Wars, right? The Star Wars movies, the last 3 installments of the Star Wars movies, were very regarded as kind of not very good, right? Part of that is because the first movie is just a recreation of stuff they've done before. Then the second movie of the trilogy is total garbage and horrible. And then the third movie of the trilogy is just trying to fix that second movie's mistakes. And so you see this decline that happened in Star Wars because of that. And that is even reflected on some of the other shows that they have within the Star Wars universe as well. And so it is, a possibility that we could see that in The Chosen or other future series from The Chosen. And it's something that we're on the lookout for all the time, right? As The Chosen Sleuth, as people that look out for this, it's definitely something that we look out for all the time. And it is a possibility because the people that are making this show are not perfect people, right? So we always have to be on the lookout of how is this show doing? Is it declining? Is it getting better? And so far, I would say that each season has gotten better, in my opinion.
And you might think, well, they're just biased. There's recency bias. No, they say...
No, they could get exhausted.
Because they go into each season when they get the scripts, the actors and the crew going, "Oh, please be good."
Right.
And expecting it to do what you just said, which is to start to wane.
Yeah.
And I would argue that we've gotten better as storytellers and as filmmakers. Now, to be fair, we're blessed by the story getting, season 5 is Holy Week. It's the most impactful and important week in the history of humanity.
Right. And there's a big mouthful to chew.
And you see Jesus show sides of himself he's never shown, which is turning over the tables of the temple and yelling and then willingly giving himself up. And you see the betrayer emerge. Judas breaks bad during Holy Week, right? And a million people both
conspiring with Caiaphas.
Yes, where we're...
Yeah, so he's saying that conspiring with Caiaphas because they're in Caiaphas's house right now. They did this on set in Texas, which was very cool. But I would 100% agree with Dallas here that he has a huge handicap when it comes to this story in particular. Yes, I do think that Dallas is capable of telling an amazing story, but having this as your source material is just so sweet that it makes it so much easier, right? For Dallas to to build this story around what he already has, right? When you're starting with such good ingredients, right? Like a Papa John's logo, right? Better ingredients, better pizza, right? Like that idea goes in every single thing. So, for example, if I was reacting to a show that nobody liked, right? If my channel was kind of surrounded around shows that nobody liked, then my channel would never get views around those shows, right? Unless it was a very compelling kind of understanding of why those shows are so bad, I guess. But generally, we try to look at the best of the best. We don't want to look at bad Christian content unless it's so bad we can't not talk about it, right? So we want to talk about great Christian content. So that's why we focus on The Chosen and Testament, and hopefully some of these newer shows that are going to be coming out next year, like the Promised Land series. So that's why we chose these shows, is because they are great. They are the highest level of Christian media, of biblical media, and so we want to be the ones to talk about them, to break them down, and to bring them into our channel. And so because of that, my source material is good, right? And it makes my job way easier than picking a mediocre product and having to sell it to my audience, right? The Chosen is so good that when I break it down, people understand what I'm talking about because the show already makes sense. So it's a great story that Dallas already has, of course, being the Bible itself. It makes a lot of sense that he's able to kind of weave in these things and make the story great easily from his point of view, because the story is already perfect. The story is already great. As we say all the time, it's the greatest story ever told.
Where we are now. And of course, in Holy Week in history, it was over 1 million people all gathered in one city, most of as many friends of Jesus as enemies, believers and people who wanted him killed, and they're all now in one powder keg.
Right.
So that makes
a hot town and hot time in the old town tonight.
So I can't take too much credit for the unique excitement of season 5. It's not necessarily that I'm a better storyteller, although I think I am, but it's also that the text is giving me so much to work with. But I think another thing that sometimes causes shows to wane is what you said earlier, which is they get enraptured by the success. Mm-hmm. And so I always am brought back to that moment back at 4:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I surrendered and recognized my own humanity and my own sinfulness and my own narcissism and my own need for surrender and my giving of and God strike my soul if I go back to who I was the day before.
Right, no kidding.
So
because it's a very bad thing to be bad, but it's a much worse thing to return to being bad after you've recognized that was insufficient.
Yeah, I think this is a great point by Jordan here. It's a horrible thing to be bad in the first place, but it's even worse to go back to that badness that you left once you understood that it's badness, right? And so someone that doesn't understand that stealing is bad, for example, a kid that doesn't understand that stealing is bad, they take something from the store and they get reprimanded for it. But now that they know that stealing is bad, the punishment should be worse the second time that they steal, once they know that it's bad. That's a really interesting point when it comes to good and evil here from Jordan. I really love the way that he puts that there.
That's a much worse, that's that parable about the servant who doesn't know what he's doing, being whipped with few blows, or the servant who knows what he's doing, being, condemned to hell fundamentally. Right.
I think the one that the parable that he's talking about here is the servant that is in front of the king and he owes the king something, then the king forgives him. And then that other servant goes to another person once he's freed, and then he basically beats him to get the money that he is owed, even though it's less. I think that's the parable he's talking about. If he's talking about a different parable, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear it. I'll look it up in a second. But I think that's the parable he's talking about here.
Because it's one thing to be bad unconsciously, and it's another thing to have learned and then return, to your.
And you just brought up what I think is a potentially strong, I don't know if I want to call it a conclusion to our conversation about the specifics of the show, but to an understanding of what I think makes the show work, which is that Jesus knows our hearts. He wants a relation. He wants a relationship with you specifically. So whether he's healing you, calling you to follow him, or rebuking you, It's not based on a paint by numbers, one size fits all. He knows what's in your heart. He knew what I needed to become the creator of The Chosen. It wasn't the same thing as someone else needed, right? He spoke to me directly, and my wife Amanda is here uniquely to make sure that I don't go back to who I was, the day before that moment. And so when Jesus calls us differently, I mean, the message of salvation is the same, but the calling is specific. And that's what you see in the show, is that
I talk about this a lot in my daily life, with my friends and the people that surround me. The idea that when we have a relationship with God, it is personal, right? So when he calls you, when he talks to you, when he speaks to you, when he says things in your life, they are often very much different than they would be for me, right? God speaks to me in a very unique way. Generally, there are certain things that happen in my life where God is moving things very quickly, right? So like, for example, whenever I became a full-time YouTuber and I left my job as a pastor, my transition there was very quick. When I met Vanessa and we were going to get married, that transition there was very quick. Whenever I, have any of these big moments in my life where God is moving and it's a declarative kind of thing in my life, he is very, he's very much the same in the way that he speaks, in the tone of his voice, in the things that happen there. I can recognize it because I know the voice of the shepherd, right? I know the smell of the shepherd. I kind of, connect this to the lambs and the shepherds back during the time of Jesus. What they would often do is if one of their lambs strayed away, they would go grab that lamb and they would end up breaking the lamb's leg. And then the lamb would be forced to lay on the shoulders of the shepherd every time that they're going anywhere. So that lamb would then get accustomed to the shepherd's voice. It would get accustomed to the shepherd's smell. And wherever that shepherd went, there the lamb was to follow him, right? Because it knew the voice of the shepherd. It knew the smell of the shepherd. It was part of the shepherd's flock. And there's nothing that could have changed that. And so once you get that understanding of God's relationship with you personally, I think that's a huge thing. A huge thing for sure.
That when you see Jesus in the show, we've probably by season 5 have shown, I don't know, a dozen or more miracles, or more than that, callings, rebukes, all of that. But each time it's specific to the heart of the person he's talking to. And we do that cinematographically too. We shrink the moment so that it feels personal. And what everyone says to me when they recognize me in public, 9 times out of 10, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, will say to me, "Thank you for the show," and they'll start to cry. And you experience this too. How many people, when they meet you, start to cry? Not because you're a celebrity, but because something's changed. Something's changed.
Yeah.
I've experienced that in my life. Well, we'll talk about this off camera, but some of the people in our lives who you've changed just from something you've said or written. And so people will come up to me and they'll start to cry. But 9 times out of 10, when they say something about the show, it feels personal.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't feel like I'm walking in, and I love St. Peter's Basilica.
Great storyteller makes the archetypal personal. That's what a storyteller does.
And that's what I mean when I say I'm taking him down from the stained glass window. So I visit St. Peter's Basilica in Italy, and it's one of probably the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life.
It's just beyond belief.
It's jaw-dropping. It can be, to the wrong person or in the wrong place, it can be distancing. It can make you go, is this the only way to reach God, is to create this level of beauty, and he's up there on the ceiling, or he's in that painting and that structure? I can't access him. I have to be quiet as I walk through it. I have to admire it. I don't have a relationship with it. And I certainly don't have a relationship personally with him. And so...
Yeah, I'd say there are 2 sides to this real quick. So I would say, one, yes, Dallas is 100% right. There are many people that within their faith, they see God as this thing that cannot be touched or reached, or they cannot approach or have a relationship with. But then there's also the other side of the coin where people think that they can do anything with God and there's no respect there, right? That they can just treat God as anything that they want in their life, and that's totally cool, right? I think there's a middle ground here where we need heavy respect for who God is, what he's done, his word, etc. But then we also have that relationship with him. To understand that Jesus made jokes, to understand that Jesus had friends, to understand that he is the one that is seeking us, right? And the Father wants us to be there as well. So I think that we cannot forget those type of things as well. There's 2 sides to this. It's not just that we have a relationship with God, but it's also that we need that respect for him as well. So there's a middle ground there for sure.
what my job is and what I'm experiencing myself and what you see in the show is again what I talked about earlier. Jesus reaching for you. Mm-hmm. You might be reaching for him and think that you have to do this perfect thing, and that's oftentimes what happens in the Old Testament. It has to be perfect, perfect, perfect. Jesus comes in and says, you know what? It's never fully going to get there. It's never going to be perfect enough, so I'll do it for you. I will be that perfection. I will be that sacrifice. I will be the perfect sacrifice that Cain couldn't come up with. And so in doing that, it makes it personal and human. And so when Jesus is healing the woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, or he's healing the man who's been blind for so long, or he's saving Simon Peter from who is a believer, but who is focused on accomplishment and trying to catch as many fish as he can so that he can pay his taxes. And Jesus comes in and calls him to something greater, which is a fisher of men, not a fisher of fish. And all that is happening on a personal level, and it's causing people to respond emotionally.
I guess that's partly why it seemed to me that you handled the miracles so well. It's not that you downplay them, it's that it's a weird thing, because you make them, in some ways, a matter of logical course. It's a weird thing to do with a miracle, but
it's the inevitable result of the need. It's
and the situation.
Yes.
And
Yeah, this is one thing that I think a lot of people criticize The Chosen about, but it makes The Chosen very human, right? Which is that Jesus needs a reason to do these things that he's doing. In the scriptures, oftentimes we kind of jump from place to place to place. We have this miracle here, then that miracle there, then this miracle here, then that miracle there. And we're kind of jumping from place to place. And it's a very fast-paced telling of the ministry of Jesus, when in actuality, Jesus' ministry happened over 3.5 years. It happened over a long period of time. And so because of that, we have to understand that there had to have been certain things that happened throughout this time in order for Jesus to do these things that he did, right? And some of that we get scripturally, some of it we don't, right? But this is where Dallas will sometimes kind of plug some of those holes and try to, make it make sense within a human lens, which I think is very impactful for a lot of storytelling moments within The Chosen itself, for sure.
Exactly.
Right.
It's that. Well, that's a strange thing to make the miracle appear to be, of course, the thing that would happen under those circumstances. Right.
So my belief is that, as we've seen you, Jordan Peterson, over the last several years, come to grips with the suffering you experienced, the physical suffering you experienced, that when you kind of disappeared for a year, and those of us who were fans are going, how's he doing? And you can't.
Yeah, if you don't know, Jordan had really some serious health issues a few months ago to a year ago, and then he really took off almost a full year from all his socials and stuff like that. He wasn't posting anything. He was dealing with his health, changing his diet, doing a bunch of different things during that time, and a lot of people were worried that he wasn't going to come back. But now, obviously, he's back and stronger than ever.
Came back out of that and described it and talked about it, and your relationship with your wife and your daughter, and all of the stories that we keep seeing on podcasts. And you talk about a dream that you've had. I mean, all the things that we've seen, and people asking you questions. Do you believe Jesus actually walked out of the tomb? Right? All these. It's watching. I think people feel more connected to you than ever, because they're seeing not only these brilliant lectures that you've given and these books that you've written, but now I'm seeing you cry because you're describing a dream that you've had. And that makes me go, oh, now I want to hear even more. And now some of the stuff that you're saying intellectually and broadly actually makes even more sense, and I'm even more connected to it. And I believe that's who God is.
Right. From a storytelling perspective, we want to know more about Jordan because his story is now it's filling up, it's deepening, right? Because Jordan Peterson is no longer just this kind of high intellectual that cannot be touched or is not reachable. He becomes a human person whenever he has catastrophes in his life, whenever he's dealing with health issues, whenever he's dealing with depression and pain and anxiety, just like the rest of us do, right? And so for us, whenever we see that moment from Jordan, it's the same thing that we see in The Chosen when we see Jesus getting angry, right? Or we see the apostles messing up because they were just human, right? And then you see these moments of divinity from Jesus as well, but there's also these human moments that I think teach us something, right? Which is great storytelling from Dallas and the team for sure. A lot of that, of course, gleaned from scripture, but these little moments I think are really important for the humanity that The Chosen kind of shows us here.
I don't have the intellectual capability to do even some of the things you're doing in your gospel series for Daily Wire. But I know I know that God created and Jesus rose. And those two things are enough for me. They're not everything, but it's enough for me to go, if I know that and I believe that, truly, then that makes everything else make sense. And now I can see some of these mysterious things through a foundation that's secure and solid, and that I still do believe, even if I don't understand this story, I do believe God created, and I do believe Jesus rose from the dead. And so my job as a storyteller and as a herald is to make that palatable to the masses as much as possible, so that they're not resistant to or denied the opportunity to explore because of things like propaganda or church hurt, or even their own religion. Sometimes our own religion can get in the way of a relationship, a personal relationship with Jesus. So I don't sit here writing going, how am I going to accomplish this? And I want to make sure that I'm sitting here just trying to tell a great story as much as well as I can and honor God and the text. But I think that's what's happening. That's when people meet me and they start to cry and they thank me. They're saying, I saw Jesus wink, or I saw Jesus look her in the eye, or I saw Jesus come down to his level as opposed to staying here. And it broke me because I realized it's for me too, just not only for that person. And so that's what The Chosen is doing for many people, is if you can see Jesus through the eyes of those who actually met him, perhaps you can be changed and impacted in the same way they were. Or, as is also in the case for many people who watch the show, they love the historical drama. It's a good show. They appreciate it. 30 to 40% of our audience is non-believers.
This is really interesting to me. I wonder if there's anybody that's watching my videos that is in the non-believing, sector. I'm sure it's much less than 30 to 40%. I could almost guarantee that. I think most likely the people who watch my videos are like 90%, if not more than that, in the Christian camp. And so I'd love to hear if you're in a non-Christian camp but you love my videos and you like seeing what I do. I'd love to hear that in the comments below. 30 to 40% for The Chosen makes sense because they are such a big show. They do so many ads and they push this show everywhere that it makes a lot of sense that they would get a lot of people who are non-Christian or maybe Christian adjacent to watch it. But yeah, that's really interesting. That's a really big figure. That's a large number, 30 to 40% of The Chosen. That means that there's at least 100 million plus people that watch the show that are not Christian, that are being impacted by it. So that's really, 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 really cool.
We've been able to track that now. Right?
That's good.
And we're hearing from people who go, I don't believe he was the Son of God, but I love this show and I'm intrigued and I'm following along and I find myself wanting to be a better person, or I'm finding myself wanting to, whatever it is. And so perhaps they don't ever bend the knee to the Son of God that I believe he is, but I'm not trying to get you to do that when you watch the show. That's God's job. I'm gathering.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting. That ending piece there where he uses that metaphor of him gathering. He talks about Peter and the nets and how Peter is, being a fisher of fish, but Jesus wants him to be a fisher of men. It's that same analogy that Jesus uses there in that parable where he says, I want you to gather all of these people and then let me sort them out, right? And so that's how Dallas sees himself as well. And that's where we come in as the Chosen Sleuth. If you haven't figured that out yet already, this is why Dallas and I work so well together. It's why we've had communication for the last, 3+ years, is because I am level 2 of the Chosen, right? I don't work for the Chosen. I'm not a part of their team. I don't do anything with the Chosen other than, events and stuff like that. But the Chosen gathers all the people. Then I take some of those people that they've gathered and I'm able to deep dive into scripture. I'm able to talk about the gospel. I'm able to talk about how if you don't have Jesus in your life as your Lord and Savior, you need to. And if you're not taking that seriously, you need to. And here's why. And so that's why I exist. That's why this channel exists, is to take some of that audience of the biblical Christian media and bring them here to deep dive into the Bible, to explain to them why certain things are the way that they are, to say who Shammai and Hillel are, right? But using that as a kickoff point in order for us to really dive deep, to really bring people to the foot of Jesus, if the Chosen hasn't done that already, right? And so that's why we love the show. Not that the show is perfect, not that Dallas himself is perfect, not that the Chosen team is perfect, but I think the show will succeed. I think it will continue to get better because, one, there's source material. I don't think there's a decline coming in terms of the show becoming woke propaganda or anything like that. But I also think that God is using this show in a very particular way, right? And he's gathering a lot of people into this show so that they can be changed by the things surrounding the show, you know? This is why Dallas does the devotionals and the study guides and all the things that he does around The Chosen, right? This is why we exist. This is why Dallas allows us to react to the show and talk about it in these different ways, right? Because he knows the significance of it. He knows the souls that are coming through our channel. So anyway, really interesting interview. I encourage you to go check it out. And of course, leave a comment below about what you thought about this whole thing, and we'll see you on the next one.